Brendan, I forgot what we call it.
Yeah.
Do we call it the Sinclair Newsroom?
I think so.
The O's Extra House of Fun.
The O's Extra House of Fun.
That's where they film O's Extra, or at least did, before
Yeah.
they moved permanently to the ballpark.
Yeah.
There's got to be some kind of...
I think House of Fun is the good way to go there.
Okay. Well, that's the way I went. We are going to be talking about the trade deadline. This is our trade deadline preview podcast officially. We're going to be talking about some of the guys that could go, some of the guys that probably I think are going to stay in-house. But we've got plenty to talk about, but we got to start, Brendan. Second softball game of the year coming up tonight.
Huge day.
Huge day. You went 2 for 2 last time?
I did.
One was like an infield single. The other...
Both of them were infield
Both
singles.
of them were infield.
One of them was a swinging bunt in my first at-bat. I was not used to the loft of the pitches, which sounds like it's really easy to get used to, but it took a little bit. So my first at-bat was a swinging bunt that I just beat out, and then the second one was an infield single.
It's okay. I went 0 for 3. Had a...
Was there any hard contact is the question.
There was a strikeout. There was soft contact, and then there was hard contact that was a fielder's choice. That honestly, I think because a lot of like the infield singles are common because you can beat out a lot of balls that are hit to shortstop, like the left side of the infield, and it was hit to the left side of the infield. So I think if they weren't able to go the short way to second, I think I probably would have beat out that throw.
Well, it sounds like things got progressively better. It was strikeout, soft contact, hard contact. So then by the second game, I mean, you're hitting home runs. I got to be hitting dingers. The other team definitely took it way too seriously. There was a woman on the other team that was like staring at the pitches as they were coming in. She took a walk. Life's too short to take walks in Monday night rec softball, Brendan. That's my take. Look, I appreciate the plate discipline.
Unless these pitches are like way out. One pitch hit me, and I didn't get my base because those are the rules. So even I didn't, but I was swinging on the next pitch. I'm not looking to take a walk.
Look, if we learned anything from our trip to Bowie, it was that if the pitch isn't yours, even if it's in the strike zone, if you can't drive it, you're not swinging at it.
Right.
And I appreciate taking that mentality from professional baseball players and applying it to Monday evening rec softball.
All due respect to Blake Britton, I think the talent on the Bowie Bay Sox team is just a tick higher than some of the talent we're seeing in the
could be
downtown Baltimore. Yeah. All right, Brendan. Before we get into the trade deadline stuff, I want to circle back on our conversation that we had last week about signing draft picks, because after the Orioles went under slot with Colton Cowser with that number 5 overall pick in the MLB draft, and then they went under slot slightly again with their second-round pick in Connor Norby. A lot of people were wondering, well, where is that money going to be going? Because the Orioles still want to use all of their draft pool. And we talked about them, taking a lot of college players later on. And some of those guys were college-eligible sophomores to the point where they had to be signed slightly over slot. One guy was Creed Willems, who is a massive catcher that hits absolute bombs from the left side of the plate, and apparently took swings at Camden Yards and one-hopped the warehouse, according to Glenn Clark. So
that'll do.
That'll work.
Yeah, and he signed for $800,000 over his projected slot value. The slot value for that 8th-round pick, I think, was projected somewhere around $180,000, and he signed for $1 million.
$187,000. So he signed for a higher dollar amount than 5 of the players the Orioles drafted ahead of him.
Yeah.
So the Orioles splashed on him. So that he was like an 8th or a 10th round pick.
Yeah, the 8th round pick, and that's the benefit of going under slot with your first few picks, which is what the Orioles did with Colton Cowser and Connor Norby, is that if you are able to find a high school player that you like in one of those later rounds, you can take a bigger swing on him, and that's what the Orioles did in the 8th round.
So they did that, and then they also signed a large number of the players that they drafted. So I said last week I thought they might go, 20 for 20. Forgot that they had the extra competitive balance pick. So there were 21 picks that they made, and so far they've signed 20 of them. There's only one holdout, and I think it's righty Daniel Lloyd, who is a college pitcher from South Carolina, who has pitched all 4 years. So
he's a 14th rounder. It's not like you are unable to sign like a 3rd or 4th rounder. It's the 14th round guy that they haven't signed yet.
And it's exactly what we thought they might do here, because with guys that are picked in rounds 11 through 20, you can pay them up to $125,000 without it affecting your bonus pool, or your draft pool, rather. But if you start going over that, then the overage comes out of the draft pool. So essentially, them going under slot early allowed them to sign more draft picks. So they are going for quantity clearly here, because from day one, Mike Elias has talked about adding as much talent to the system as possible. Like we said on last podcast, he understands the draft is a crapshoot. If you get as many guys as possible out of that draft, then you are increasing your odds on hitting on one of those guys.
Yeah, and they did go over slot at a few different places as well, most notably in the 3rd, 6th, and 7th rounds, along with that 8th round way over slot.
Yeah.
So they were able to use that money effectively later on in the draft.
And one of our comments on Facebook, Justin Anderson, saying Creed Williams, also a two-way player, also a pitcher. So, yeah, I think the Orioles, and that the Orioles did not specify. I remember Brad Seelick after the draft, he said he's a baseball player about Creed Williams. So we'll see. I mean, looking at the body type, looking at the swing, I think he's probably going to stick as a position player. But you never know.
Well, if he's hitting one hoppers to the warehouse, my assumption is that you go with the bat first.
We're in the Shohei age now, so I think we're going to see a lot of two-way players be tried
He's going to pitch and catch simultaneously. He will throw to himself.
He's going to have to be pretty fast.
Yeah, well, 5-tool player.
5? Yeah, 6, some would say.
Yeah.
All right. Let's get... Oh, by the way, one more thing I want to mention. Jordan Lawler, we are less than a week away from the deadline for these picks to sign. So, by the way, the Orioles might sign that last guy, Daniel Lloyd. They might go 21 for 21, which I don't know how many teams are going to end up with 21 signed draft picks.
Yeah.
I can't imagine very many. But Jordan Lawler, who was on the board when the Orioles were selecting, taken by the Diamondbacks with that 6th overall pick, still has not signed. I think he's still considering Vanderbilt.
It's going to take probably a lot of money for Jordan Lawler to be dragged away from Vanderbilt. Again, I would be surprised if he goes to play college baseball, especially because this is a top 10 pick.
Yeah.
But the Diamondbacks are probably figuring out at this point that maybe they have some later round picks that they liked, and maybe you're not able to sign those guys over slot or even at their slot value if you sign Jordan Lawler to some huge deal for the number 6 pick.
Yeah, and I don't know enough about the Diamondbacks draft and who they've signed so far, but my guess is Mike Elias would not want to be in a position where he still has not had his first-round pick signed, because and that hampers you, because then that's where the bulk of your money's going to go. So then how much money are you going to have left over to sign these other guys? It probably has to work chronologically, pretty much.
Right.
You know, you can probably sign some of those later guys, but all starts with that first-round pick.
And we mentioned it on draft night, not to go into the big draft night tangent here, but if you go that far over slot with one of your top picks, it backs you into a corner a little bit, because then it really limits your draft board in terms of the guys that you're able to look at in those later rounds. You probably can't look at some of the high school overslot guys like the Orioles were.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's flip the script over to the trade deadline coming up on Friday at 4 p.m. There are a few candidates that the Orioles have in-house, but I think we are at a point now where I think 6 months ago we might have thought that the Orioles would have more trade pieces at their disposal than they currently do. And I think that it's a lot of reasons why that has happened, but I think the overwhelming story at this trade deadline is the Orioles are probably not going to be doing very much, because the guys that they have in-house are either they're one of 3 categories. 1, they're just not good enough to be traded. 2, they are good and young, and the Orioles want to hold on to them. And 3 is the smaller category, which they are right in the sweet spot where they are just old enough and just good enough to be trade pieces.
Well, and the other spot there, maybe they're just injured, like Freddie Galvis.
True.
He probably would have been a trade piece at this deadline because he was playing well enough to get traded, but I don't think he is going to get dealt because of the injury concern. You can probably throw John Means into that category as well. I don't think Means would have been traded to begin with, but the injury does not help the Orioles' case if they were looking to trade him. I don't think they were, but
I think Means is in a different category slightly. And he has come back. I mean, now he's healthy, so I think teams at least have seen a couple healthy starts from him. But I think Means is in the category, the good and young category, the category of we want to hold on to these guys.
Right.
And we'll get into them later. And there you can make a case to trade some of these guys, but I think this category is the 3 M's, the Cedric Mullins, the John Means, the Trey Mancini. Those 3, I think, fit that category for the most part. But I think the reason that Mike Elias, you mentioned Freddie Galvis, Michael Franco was another guy who was a 1-year major league deal signing in the offseason, right before the season started. And the hope is, with some of these deals, you're going to be able to flip these guys. And the other deals that fall into this category, Matt Harvey was a minor league deal, $1 million if he makes the roster. He has not been good enough. And you have Felix Hernandez, who didn't even make the team out of spring training. Same deal, minor league deal that was $1 million guaranteed if he signed. And I think the Orioles looked at what they did in 2020 and said, if we take enough of these low-risk swings, we might be able to hit on them. And for various reasons, they just have not hit on any of the guys that they thought they might hit on.
Yeah, and the low risk is the important thing to point out there. You can sign Michael Franco to a relatively low-risk major league deal, and even if he doesn't pan out as somebody that you can move at the deadline, which he has not panned out so far, and it would be very surprising if he does get traded, you don't really incur that big of a penalty.
Right.
You just pretty much have to pay him for the rest of the year. He's not really playing well enough to even guarantee himself a starting spot every day. So say there was somebody, like if Rylan Bannon was playing better in the minors right now, you could still make a justifiable case that Rylan Bannon could be starting over Michael Franco. So he's not holding down a roster spot to the point where you can't bench him if you want to start a prospect, and you also aren't paying him a ton of money.
Right.
If you had paid a free agent a lot more money in hopes that they would get traded and they're having a similar struggling Michael Franco season, that's where you incur the big risk, and the Orioles really didn't do that.
Right, and the low-risk swings that Mike Elias made last year, I think one was Tommy Milone. He was a minor league deal, similar to, I don't think he had $1 million guarantee if he made the roster, but it was a similar deal to the Felix Hernandez, the Matt Harvey, and that one hit. Signed Tommy Milone, I think it was like Valentine's Day in February.
Yeah.
He ends up sticking with the team, obviously makes the opening day start in place of John Means. And he, because of the COVID season, the shortened season, the Orioles actually might have benefited from that, in that they saw that other teams saw less of him and decided to trade for him. So they only saw 6 starts from Tommy Milone in 2020. He had a 3.99 ERA through those 6 starts. If we had the same 60-game season, trade deadline was a month after the season started like it was last year, and we saw only 6 starts from Matt Harvey, he had a 3.60 in his first 6 starts. So they both fell off the cliff around the same time. The difference was Tommy Milone was already on the Braves when he fell off the cliff.
Right.
And Matt Harvey was not. He was still on the Orioles. So, there are similar swings to make, but the Orioles actually might have gotten a little bit lucky with some of their swings that they made last year just because of the shortened season.
But hey, Matt Harvey, 12 shutout innings since the All-Star break. He's been pretty good. Not good enough to get traded. I seriously doubt that any team is going to look at Matt Harvey at this point. No, do not believe those fake accounts going around Twitter. I don't think there's going to be a contending team that is so desperate for starting pitching that they go after Matt Harvey. I don't really think there's any starting pitcher on the roster at this point that a contending team could look at and trade for outside of John Means. And I think, like you said, Means probably falls into the category of young enough and good enough to stick around. So it's really just the bullpen when you're looking at potential arms that the Orioles could deal.
Yeah, exactly. And the deals that the Orioles made last year, 2 of them were bullpen deals. If you remember, it was Richard Blyer. Although, actually, Richard Blyer was earlier. He was
early in the season when the Marlins had that COVID outbreak.
Yeah, and
they just needed players.
And that's another example of the Orioles getting a little bit lucky in 2020 with the trade pieces, because the Marlins were so desperate that the Orioles didn't get much back. I think they got a recent international signing in the Richard Blyer deal. But at the deadline, they traded Michael Givens to the Colorado Rockies. And they traded Miguel Castro right at the buzzer to the Mets. So 2 of the 3 deadline deals, we'll qualify them as, within 24, 48 hours of the deadline, were bullpen deals. That's really the only avenue for the Orioles at this deadline.
Yeah, and for this deadline, there isn't really a Michael Givens. There's not a reliever on the roster that has the track record that Michael Givens did and can come in for a team and be a closer. So I don't think we're going to see any kind of return that is similar to the Terrin Vavra and Tyler Nevin return that the Orioles got from Michael Givens. However, Miguel Castro was, 26 at the time that
26.
he was traded and had a lot of potential.
Actually, 25.
25?
Yeah.
I think Tanner Scott falls into that Miguel Castro category where you could get a sneaky good prospect there. I think Tanner Scott probably will demand more prospects than somebody like Paul Fry, but I think those are the two big candidates that could get dealt this year.
Yeah, so let's start with Paul Fry. I think he's the more likely of the two to get traded. Lefty, that helps his case. Teams are always looking for lefties. Teams are always looking for bullpen pieces, period, at the deadline. So, it's not like you have to be a lights-out closer for your name to come up in trade talks. He's 29, so happy birthday, by the way. Turns 29 today.
Yeah.
Happy birthday, Paul Fry. He does not fit in the Orioles rebuild as much as some of his counterparts in that bullpen, including Tanner Scott. The age just makes it a little bit more difficult to see him lining up with some of the Orioles pieces. He's eligible for arbitration starting next season, so that makes him attractive for a team because they still have 3 years of control of Paul Fry as he goes into the beginning of his 30s. And he's having a good season. I mean, he has 2 blown saves. Just about everybody on this team has a blown save. There's no true closer on this team, unfortunately, but he's got a 3.49 ERA, 12 and a half strikeouts per 9, which is the highest mark of his career, and a 1.16 whip, which is the lowest mark of his career. And he's been very reliable for the Orioles, has not given up a home run yet. Clearly one of Brandon Hyde's favorite weapons to use out of that bullpen. And you, like I said, you don't have to be an elite closer for you to bring back some kind of return. Not like he would demand 4 prospects or something like that, but I think his numbers and track record are good enough to get something back at the deadline.
Yeah, and you'd be hard-pressed to find a team that would not have a spot for Paul Fry. Like you said, he's not an elite closer, and he's not going to give a contending team somebody who can come in the 9th inning in those super high-leverage situations. But if you need somebody for the 7th or 8th inning, Paul Fry is a good option for somebody. He has a decent track record. In 3 of his 4 years in the majors, he's got an ERA in the mid-3s or better. And like you said, this year, his whip and his strikeout numbers are improved.
Yeah.
Paul Fry is somebody that we talked about last year as a potential trade candidate as well, but the numbers have gotten better for Paul Fry, even if the ERA has been pretty consistent. And like we said before, contending teams pretty much always need bullpen help.
Yes.
Like, you are going to be hard-pressed to find a team that could not use Paul Fry. Teams like the Mets, Phillies, Reds, Blue Jays, Mariners, all those teams could use bullpen help. And Paul Fry, while he probably won't command a great prospect, I would be surprised if the Orioles even get a top 25 prospect for Paul Fry. Maybe somebody sneaks into the top 30, but he's still a valuable bullpen piece.
Yeah, I think you probably get, if you're looking for a comparable deal from recent history, I think the Blyer deal is probably the closer one. Even though the strikeout numbers, he's a much better strikeout pitcher than Richard Blyer was. Age is somewhat similar, though, and the Orioles only got a recent international signing, like I mentioned, back for Blyer. So I don't expect the return to be a whole lot if he is dealt. But I think the years of control definitely help, because you mentioned a lot of those teams, like the Mariners, the Angels, the Reds. They're probably looking for some controllable pitchers. They're probably looking for somebody who is not a rental, just to try to get them over the hump this year. I think they're probably thinking not just this year, but next year and the year after, to try to make a push. So I think that makes him more attractive than some of the other rental relievers on the market.
Yeah, and James on Facebook asking if the Orioles in these trades would be getting major league players in return or prospects. I would assume prospects, because unless it's a really young major league player or somebody who is on the verge of the major leagues, it feels a little redundant to be moving quality veterans for other quality veterans. So I would assume that if the Orioles are trading somebody like Paul Fry, they would probably get a prospect, maybe not a top prospect, maybe not in the top 30, or somebody who was a recent international signing.
Yeah, and Mike Elias always says he likes to have those kind of recent international signings thrown in, because teams are more likely to trade them. They're more of a gamble because they're very young. They're like 16, 17 years old. And because the Orioles still are looking to upgrade their international system, which, obviously was neglected for several years and needs an influx of talent. So they will use anybody that they take. And like we've said in the past, Fernando Tatis Jr. was somewhat of a throw-in way back when.
Right.
When he came over in the James Shields trade, right?
Yeah, you never know with those players that
Yeah.
are even like Trey Turner was a player to be named later. David
Right.
Ortiz was a player to be named later. Obviously, the Orioles are probably not going to strike gold like that, but you never know.
Yeah, you never know. And a lot of those guys last year, if you recall, because you couldn't name them, I think if they weren't on your 60-man player pool, you couldn't name them until after the season.
Yeah,
You
it was
remember that?
it was a weird.
Yeah.
We don't really need to worry about it because it was a weird COVID
we
protocol.
have minor leagues.
Yes.
all very good this year.
Yeah.
So I think Paul Fry represents your biggest, your most likely to be traded piece.
I would agree. I think at this point, I would be more surprised if Paul Fry didn't get traded than I would if he did.
Yes. Then there's Tanner Scott, who to me is more of the Miguel Castro category. So Miguel Castro was 25 when he was traded last year, and the book on Castro was this guy has great stuff. He's got this blistering fastball. He just needs to control it a little bit more. Well, that's been Tanner Scott. Tanner Scott has very high strikeout numbers. He's got 10 Ks per 9. 13 Ks per 9.
Yeah.
He was probably the Orioles' best reliever in 2020. Like a 1.3 ERA last year, was lights out for them. Comes into this year, and it has still been good, but the walks have been a major issue for Tanner Scott.
Yes.
They cropped up over the weekend in the series against the Nationals. He ultimately got out of the hole that he was digging, but he did put runners on base, and that has been the high wire act that we've seen Tanner Scott walk this year.
Yeah, that's the thing with Miguel Castro from last year as well. You had a lot of command issues, and if you are trading for Tanner Scott, you are hoping that he can come in high leverage situations. Again, not going to be your closer, but you're still hoping if you're trading for him that Tanner Scott will be effective for you in the 6th, 7th, 8th inning for a contending team. How confident are you in Tanner Scott bringing him in the 7th or 8th when his walks per 9 is over 6?
Yeah.
That is really questionable for Tanner Scott. The stuff is there. If you believe in the command enough, then I think he can get a decent prospect. I think we can both agree that looking back right now with how Kevin Smith has been pitching in the minors, the Mets overpaid for Miguel Castro in terms of the prospect that they gave up. So I don't think we will see a similar deal for Tanner Scott unless another team wants to overpay with a really good prospect. I think maybe he has a better chance of getting a top 20, 25 prospect than Paul Fry does because of his age and because he has those really good strikeout numbers. I wouldn't be shocked if the Orioles can get a 20 to 25 range prospect from somebody.
Yeah, that was one of the last deals of the Brody Van Wagenen era, I believe. And Miguel Castro has actually been pretty good for the Mets this year. He's got like a 3.60 ERA. But yeah, I think it's fair to say that was the Orioles got value and then some in that deal. The question with Tanner Scott, though, he's 27 years old. He fits the timeline a whole lot better than Paul Fry. Those 2 years are big 2 years. And he's in the same level of contract status. So he's eligible for arbitration starting next season, under control for 3 more years. But him being a little bit younger, in theory, there is some untapped potential. I don't know if he's ever. I think the dream of him being a starter has probably died.
Not happening.
But the dream of him being an effective reliever on a team that is, trying to somewhat contend next year and is trying to definitely make the playoffs, I would think, in theory, in 2023, that's still on the table for Tanner Scott. And he is valuable now, but is he more valuable to keep in-house than he would be to ship off for some lower-level prospects?
It's a good question, and also the question that you have to ask as well. I know the Orioles are not going to win that many games this year, but if you're trading both Paul Fry and Tanner Scott, Brandon Hyde is left in a precarious position in that bullpen.
He is in the short term.
Once you get to the 7th, 8th inning, who's there at that point? Tyler Wells, if you keep Cesar Valdez, Cole Sulcer.
I think things will shake out. I think, and Michael Ice can't really worry about that.
The short term is not a concern.
No, and also keep in mind, I think that we're a little bit, Bruce Zimmerman is still on the mend, so he's probably going to come back and be back in your rotation. Alexander Wells is making another start, so he's been taking up a spot in that rotation. We still think Jorge Lopez probably will move to the bullpen because he just can't get over that 4th and 5th inning hump. Keegan Aiken is probably going to be moved to the bullpen, so I think that they will be okay. in that category. They're
Hunter Harvey still on the mend as well.
Yeah, they're not going to have the same reliable. If they trade both Paul Fry and Tanner Scott, they're not going to have. Brandon Hyde's not going to have more reliable options there, but he will have. There will be enough players to throw out there, and I think that should be less of a concern. The short term is always less of a concern than it is for the long term, but I see what you're saying.
Yeah, and Mike Elias is not going to be concerned with, well, in the 2021 season, maybe there won't be a 7th, 8th inning option for the Orioles. If he can get good prospects for Paul Fry or Tanner Scott, he's going to make the move.
Yeah. So I think that those two represent, in that order, Paul Fry, Tanner Scott, the most likely to be dealt. There are some other names being thrown around. I think the third most likely could be Cole Sulser. Saw that in the chat as well. Similar to Paul Fry in terms of age. He's actually a little bit older. He's 31 and is also having a good season. ERA under 3, just a tick under 3. WHIP is a little inflated, 1.26. Striking out 12 per 9. So is he in that category as well? Has he boosted his stock enough to the point where he's tradable? He only has still about 60 games played, 60 appearances in his career, and he's 31 years old, so the track record is not there. But sometimes you see teams go for the hot hand at the deadline. They say, let's try to ride this wave for the second half of the season and see if he can get us, eat some innings, get us into the playoffs.
The thing with Cole Sulser that is different from Paul Fry and Tanner Scott in my eyes in terms of how likely he is to get traded is that Cole Sulser is not coming in for you in high leverage situations. He hasn't been coming in for the Orioles in many high-leverage situations. You look at his game logs and going back and looking at what games he's pitched in. If he's in the 7th inning, it's probably a 4 or 5 run game. If he's in the 8th inning, it's probably the same thing, 4 or 5 runs. Yes, his numbers are pretty good, but he's really not coming in those late-game, close situations. And I think most teams around the league probably have guys that they are comfortable throwing in the 7th inning if they've got a 4 or 5 run lead.
Right.
His numbers have been decent, and he hasn't been having a bad season, but are you going to be able to get anything for a guy that probably will not come in a high-leverage situation for a contending team?
Yeah. The other question, though, I think is fair, is how much would you trust Tanner Scott and Paul Fry in those situations?
Right.
They have both...
I think more than Cole Sulser, more than likely.
Tanner Scott's blown 2 saves. Paul Fry's blown 2 saves. But... yeah, I think that you can trust them more in the 8th and 7th innings.
Yes.
As opposed to the 9th. None of these 3 guys are a bona fide closer. But I think that you can definitely trust those 2. And based on what we've seen Brandon Hyde do, at least. But I think that also the more that he sees of Cole Sulser, the more that he trusts him. I think we're starting to see the core 4 for Brandon Hyde out of that bullpen is Paul Fry, Tanner Scott, Dylan Tate, and Cole Sulser. It's those 4 guys that he really has leaned on, and we saw it in the Nats game. I think it was Friday in relief of Jorge Lopez. He needed 4 1/3 or 4 2/3, and he went with those 4 guys. And he's mixed up the order occasionally, but it is those 4 guys. So he is valuable. But I would agree, and I think at 31 years old, there is a little bit of concern of why hasn't this guy been better for longer? He should have had more of a track record at 31. It was the same thing with like when the Orioles got him, and it was like he had 7 scoreless appearances for the Rays in 2019. How did the Orioles get him for so cheap? And then he pitches in 2020 and he's really struggles. So right. We'll see. But I think that he's possible to be traded.
I think Dylan Tate also is a possibility as well, but I think he falls under the category of kind of a worse Tanner Scott, where he's got the age and he has the potential, but he is not as good as Tanner Scott. He does not have the track record that Tanner Scott does. And I think if you're the Orioles, it's probably more valuable at this point to hold on to Dylan Tate and see if he can develop into something more and see if he can develop into a Tanner Scott type where you trust him more in that 7th, 8th inning rather than dealing him at this point where he's probably not commanding a lot.
And while he does not have the track record that Tanner Scott does, he does have higher pedigree. Former first-round pick, very high first-round pick, I think number 4 overall several years ago. So I think maybe teams could, they wouldn't have the track record, but maybe they're banking on him cashing in a little bit of that high potential.
Yeah, and the last bullpen arm, I think there's a very small % chance, but Cesar Valdez has looked good since he's returned. He's pitched 6 scoreless innings. He's got 4 strikeouts. I know his ERA is under 6 on the season. My only thinking with Cesar Valdez is that if you are a contending team that needs somebody to come in and just eat innings, we've seen Cesar Valdez has the potential to be a starter. We know he can come in a bullpen situation and give you 3 innings. I don't think there's a high % chance he gets dealt because he has a really bad ERA so far this season, had a rough stretch leading up to his injury. I think there's at least a small % chance that somebody just needs a bullpen inning eater, and that's what Cesar Valdez can provide.
I mean, in theory, he could be an opener, but Brandon Hyde has not started him once since he's come over. He's very old. He's got a 5.70 ERA. I know he was great in 2020. And
I think there's a very small % chance.
I think there's a 0%. Brandon. I'm not. I won't sugarcoat it. I like Cesar Valdez as much as the next guy, probably more than the next guy, but I don't think there's any chance anybody trades for him at this point. I think teams have figured out the dead fish.
I give it a solid 2% chance.
Yeah, it's going to be less than that. I think if there's anybody that's like a wild card, I think there's a chance maybe Adam Plutko is being thrown around.
Same category. Somebody that can come in and eat innings for you if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, Plutko can actually start. He has started in his career, but he's got an ERA close to 5. Not a big strikeout guy. Strikes out 7 per 9. Pretty high whip, 1.5. He's been valuable for Brandon Hyde because he can bounce around between long relief and starting if necessary, but he just got traded right before the season for cash. So has he done anything in the past few months to boost that trade value to the point where the Orioles could get a player? Probably not.
Yeah, I think if you're looking at the bullpen as a whole leading up to the trade deadline, there's Paul Fry and Tanner Scott who have a pretty decent chance of getting dealt. There's Cole Sulser who has a small chance of getting dealt. And then everybody else, maybe if a team is looking for something very, very specific, they could go for a Cesar Valdez or an Adam Plutko. But in all probability, those guys will not get dealt.
Yeah. We are seeing comments about the 3 M's, about Mullins, Mancini, and Means. To me, the comments right before the draft of Mike Elias talking about Cedric Mullins and said he is becoming a face of the franchise type player.
Cedric Mullins is here.
I mean, I try not to read too much into what GMs say because they're always trying to throw smoke screens out there. However, I tend to believe Mike Elias here. I think that the age of Cedric Mullins, 26 years old, the fact that he has shown legitimately 4 of the 5 tools. The only tool he doesn't have is the arm at this point, but he still has speed. He's showing increased power. He's been one of the best outfielders in the American League this year, and it looks like this could be the start of something. Maybe he's not going to hit 300 every year, but he seems like a valuable enough player and a young enough player to keep around.
Look, over the last few years, the Orioles have been in a mode of if a player is good and good enough to get traded, he is probably getting traded. But the Orioles are at the point of the rebuild right now, where if there is a young player who is succeeding at the major league level, you can make a solid argument that he should be here to stay because he lines up with the timeline of the rebuild. We're not even talking about Ryan Mountcastle. Mountcastle, every team in the majors could use Ryan Mountcastle. He's not going anywhere because he is a young player and he has been proven at the major league level to be a piece that the Orioles are going to keep going forward in their rebuild. I think Cedric Mullins is young enough where he fits that category. And look, my thinking with Cedric Mullins is pretty simple. You would need one of the best prospects in all of baseball, in my opinion, to trade Cedric Mullins. Every single team in the majors would start Cedric Mullins somewhere in their outfield at this point.
Probably in center.
Probably in center. And if you are trading for a prospect that you're getting in return, you are hoping that by the time that prospect is 26 years old, he gives you as good of a season as Cedric Mullins is giving you right now.
And odds are he won't.
And odds are he will not.
Yeah.
Because Cedric Mullins was an all-star starter.
Yeah.
And if you get a prospect that turns into an all-star starter, congratulations, because that hardly ever happens.
Yeah, you hit the lottery. Exactly.
So they
hit the lottery with this kid.
And it's the same rationale at this point, I don't think Cedric Mullins is quite the player that Byron Buxton is, but the Twins are in a similar situation. They are in the basement in their division. Byron Buxton is a young, very good center fielder, and they don't want to move him.
Yeah.
Because Byron Buxton can be the centerpiece of a very good team for a very long time, and Cedric Mullins provides you that same opportunity.
And he's still under contract for at least 3 more years. I think he's still even pre-arbitration eligible because of the amount of time that he spent in the minors. I think he becomes arbitration eligible, in 2023. So he's still under contract for 4 more years. That is incredibly valuable and too valuable to give up, in my mind.
Yes.
The other 2 M's, Trey Mancini, John Means. Trey Mancini is the oldest of the 3 M's. He's 29 years old. To me, he is worth more to you, to your franchise, to the guys in the locker room than he would be to any other team because of what he has been through. And being a GM is a difficult job, especially because a lot of the times you have to remove emotion from decisions and make these difficult decisions that, often aren't popular. We know Mike Elias is not afraid to make deals that are not popular. But to me, this goes beyond not popular. To me, this goes beyond this is we want to keep this guy here. And he has 1 year left of arbitration eligibility, and then he hits the free agent market in 2020 after the 2022 season. We'll talk about that. We'll have all offseason to talk about whether you extend him, what you do with him long term. However, he is worth so much more than a midseason trade in my mind.
And I agree with you there, but I think we also have to keep in mind that as much as we value Trey Mancini, as the team values Trey Mancini, the community, everything, I think a team looking to trade for him is probably also taking those things into consideration as they are making a playoff push.
You mean the veteran leadership?
The veteran leadership, all of that.
Yeah, but I guess so, but that matters. But the fact
it's not as valuable to them as it is to the Orioles, and I would absolutely agree there. But there is also something to be said about trading for somebody like Trey Mancini, who immediately comes in and is not only a great baseball player, but is a massive addition to your clubhouse, to your team, to your community.
I agree, but I think that that's a secondary factor when you're looking at deadline deals. I think deadline deals, you're looking way more at production, and if he is a veteran leader in the clubhouse, that helps.
Right.
To me, I just think that is so much a part of his Baltimore story at this point and his story in this franchise. Again, I try not to look at these things from like an emotional standpoint, but this is a guy that is worth more, I think, in-house. I just wouldn't, and also consider like the production. He's been great since the All-Star break, since the Home Run Derby. He's is approaching 20 home runs. He's hitting in the 260s, but plays only first base or DH. Can't play any other position pretty much at this point. You're not going to throw him in the outfield. So defensively, he doesn't offer a whole lot. How much is a player like that viewed highly around the league in terms of value that he's bringing on the field?
I mean, there are a few contending teams that are making playoff pushes that could use a first baseman right now. 2 of them come in the division with the Yankees and Red Sox, and then the Brewers as well have not gotten consistent production out of their first base spot. So as much as we probably just don't want to trade Trey Mancini, we don't want to see him go at the deadline, I think of the 3 M's of Cedric Mullins, John Means, and Trey Mancini, he has, in my opinion, by far the highest chance of getting dealt. Like you said, he's been fantastic since the All-Star break, hitting .318 with 4 home runs. He's got an OPS close to 960. He's slugging close to 600. I don't see a contending team not being, especially in the American League, not being able to find a spot for Trey Mancini in the lineup most days, whether it's first base, whether it's DH. I think there's a decent chance that he gets dealt because he just provides a ton of value even on the field at this point. We've talked about so much of his value off the field, but on the field, he's still one of the better first basemen in baseball. And
yeah,
he's older. He doesn't exactly line up with the Orioles rebuild timeline. I think there's a chance.
I think I'm not ruling it out completely. I do think there's a chance. However, I would be surprised.
I would also be surprised.
Floored, but I would be surprised.
I would give it, if I had to throw a percentage chance on it right now, I would give it like a 25-30% chance that he gets dealt, because even though we shouldn't put emotion into it and we shouldn't think about those things, I think even Mike Elias probably has to recognize that what Trey Mancini means to the city of Baltimore, to the team as a whole, gives him so much more value. Yeah. So you would probably have to be floored by a deal for Trey Mancini to move him somewhere.
Yeah.
And I think there's a possibility there because, like I said, there are a few contending teams that have not gotten good production out of first base, and Trey Mancini would be a very clear and immediate upgrade there. But I think the deal would have to be a really, really good one.
Yes, I agree. I just think he provides also value for 20. Just imagining him being the veteran leader of a clubhouse next year that is trying to win some games, and you have your top prospects coming up.
I completely agree with you in the take that he gives the Orioles more value than he gives probably most other teams in baseball. But again, he would also provide a team who is making a push. Yeah. A lot of value in the lineup.
Yeah. All right. John Means, last one. I don't think this deal gets done. I don't think he ends up being somebody who is traded just because he has shown incredible highs this year, and he has not been the John Means that we have come to expect since he came back from the injury. And injuries are certainly a problem with John Means. I think at this point in his career, it's fair to say, they've hampered him a little bit. Struggled with some injuries in 2020. And it's the same type thing. It's arm fatigue. And that could be an issue for a starting pitcher that you are expecting to be a workhorse in your rotation. However, I think that injury history also makes him a little bit less likely to be traded, because I think teams are less likely to give up something. So again, I think it would have to be for all three of these guys, and for John Means in particular, it would have to be a Godfather offer for the Orioles to pull the trigger on a deal like that, and I just don't see a team really doing that.
Yeah, because you talk about Trey Mancini as kind of the veteran guy over the next few years if he sticks around in that Orioles lineup. John Means could very well be that veteran starting pitcher that sticks around for the Orioles over the next few years. He is good enough and young enough to stick in the rotation for however many years going forward, say the next 3 or 4, when he's in the rotation with hopefully Grayson Rodriguez, DL Hall, some other guys in the Orioles minor league system. I think he's very valuable to keep as that veteran starting pitching presence. And like you said, I don't think the Orioles will get a good enough prospect in return for John Means to have something be worth dealing him.
Yes. It's just the mere thought of that he could be scratching the surface of how good he is worth waiting it out to see, because it's the same argument you made with Cedric Mullins. You're hoping that a prospect you get in return will one day throw a no-hitter.
It's the mystery box.
Yeah. It's like, maybe, maybe not, probably not.
In its simplest form, it's, do you want Cedric Mullins, or do you want a prospect that you hope one day might be as good as Cedric Mullins?
Right.
The choice is pretty easy
for
there,
Mike Elias.
Seems like.
Yeah, a lot of the deals have made sense because they've been guys on expiring deals. They've been older guys who are over 30, like the Jose Iglesias trade, the Alex Cobb trade, the Jonathan VR trade. All of those deals made sense because of their age and because of their contract status. And the Orioles just do not have enough guys that fit into both of those categories. And we've seen Mike Elias be very hesitant to trade guys who are under team control for several more years. And that's one more thing about the Miguel Castro deal. His age was, fitting with the rebuild. He was 25 years old. However, he's much closer to free agency. I think he only has one more year under contract. That makes Mike Elias much more willing to trade him.
Yes.
And while Trey Mancini is approaching free agency, nobody else on this list really is. So I think that is something that makes them more likely to stay with the Orioles.
Yeah, Matt on Facebook makes a good point. Comparing Trey to a Markakis or J.J. Hardy type, a veteran player that can stick around on a team that might compete in a few years. I think that's a very good comparison there. Last guy I want to touch on real quick, I don't think he gets dealt, but Anthony Santander, leading up to the season, we talked about him as not a certainty to be off the team, but you and I kind of both assumed, looking at the Orioles' prospects in the outfield, that Anthony Santander might be on the way out once this trade deadline approached. Given the injury and given the fact that he is not really played all that well when he's been on the field. Would be very surprising if Anthony Santander gets traded, unless there is a team that is absolutely desperate for outfield help and just looks at Anthony Santander's 2020 and says, we'll go off of that.
Yeah, the injury issues that have plagued his career have come back. And he's only played 62 games. I think that is by far the biggest issue. I mean, he still has yet to play more than 93 games in a season. And I know he's still fairly young. He's still 26, 27. But a team is going to look at that and say, how can we trust this guy to stay healthy?
And the thing that Mike Elias is probably thinking, if I have to guess, is that if you can get a healthy first half somewhere down the line from Anthony Santander, whether it's next year, the year after, say next year Anthony Santander stays healthy for the first half of the season and he is a good quality outfielder for that first half, you can probably get way more value for him then than you can get for him right now. I don't think Mike Elias is going to sell low on Anthony Santander.
He's only hitting .231 right now, still does not walk a whole lot, .280 on base percentage. Yeah, I mean, .667 for an OPS is not going to...
You'd have to sell low.
Anyone, doors off. And the other thing, you could still get a good final 2 months of the season, trade him in the offseason.
Exactly.
That's still a possibility as well. And the other thing is, we thought that Yusniel Diaz would be banging down the door at this point. He has not been. We thought that maybe, there might be some prospects coming up through the system. Maybe not Heston Kjerstad because he's further away. But, we thought that there might be a little bit more competition in AAA and AA for those outfield spots. And it just has not come to fruition. So it's not like you need to deal him to make room for a prospect.
Right, but maybe you do next year because Ryan McKenna has been playing very well. There's guys lighting it up in Kyle Stowers has been fantastic in AA.
The trio of Kyle Stowers, Zach Watson, and Robert Newstrom's up in AAA now.
Yep.
Who am I forgetting? Kyle Stowers, Zach Watson.
In the outfield you're talking about? Adam Hall?
No. It's good podcasting.
They
have gotten great production
Yes.
from Johnny Reiser.
There it is.
Yeah. Has been terrific in AA and AAA. So good that I remember all their names.
So maybe next year is the year that you look to move Anthony Santander because at that point, those guys who are now in AA Bowie will probably be at AAA Norfolk by then. Maybe they get calls up to the majors, and maybe that's when you look to move Anthony Santander. But I don't think it's this deadline.
Yeah, the way that Kyle Stowers is playing, he may end up in Norfolk before the end of this season.
Yeah.
And the way Robert Newstrom is playing, he may end up in Baltimore. I don't think he's going to end up in Baltimore, but he's been great.
Fun to think about. You never know.
2018 fifth-round pick, I think, for Robert Newstrom.
Yeah.
Guy hits the ball a million miles.
He does.
All right, so that's our trade deadline preview. Of course, deals can get done from any time until now, until that deadline. Friday at 4 p.m., so stick with us on MASNsports.com and all of our social feeds as we get you ready for the trade deadline and take you through the team that's been one of the hottest in baseball since the trade deadline, your Baltimore Orioles.
6-3 Baltimore Orioles since the deadline, just swept the Nationals. Might have swept the Nationals into being sellers at the trade deadline.
Did. I think we can say did.
Yeah.
Got the Marlins coming to town, so another sub-500 team that the Orioles could pick up some wins, stack Austin wins, if you will.
Yeah, some winnable games. You've got 2 games against the Marlins, 3 games against the Tigers.
Yeah, although the Tigers have been hot, but these are sub-500 teams, Brendan.
Orioles might be buyers at the deadline.
You never know. A little run. Never know. So stick with us on all our social platforms. Of course, you can hear the podcast on Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. Watch it on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Anywhere you get your podcasts. Essentially, you can get the MASN All Access Podcast. He's Brendan Mortensen, at Brendan Morty on Twitter. I am at Paul Mancano. Thanks, of course, to Amy Jennings behind the scenes, running things very smoothly, might I say. Thanks so much for tuning in. We will be back to wrap up the trade deadline. Might have some trades to dissect and talk about in a week's time. So we'll see you then.